Zack here, publisher of the Pulse News Weekly. Joining me in the WPLZ studios is Mitch Glazier. He's Executive Vice President, Government and Industry Relations, Recording Industry Association of America. Welcome to the studio, WPLZ. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. You just came out of a lunch presentation to the Chattanooga Technology Council, and I was just going to follow up with a general question at first. It looked like you're laying out the path forward for the RIAA and where you're going to go in the future with your policy issues and the issues surrounding technology and how to deal with certain devices and apps, as one of the things you touched on was apps. When it comes to the phases, you touched on the phases of that adopting new policy. You talked about the all plastic phase, you're buying albums. You talked about the plastic to bits phase with downloading music, and then the units to listening phase, where you're taking those units and just using them and listening to them from a cloud. You say we're in the middle of phase 2. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, downloading with the advent of iTunes was the first response to where the music industry could evolve, how people could get music when they wanted it and how they got it, and how they wanted it. But it still depended on an acquisition model, that model of owning something or keeping something. And as we move forward, and especially generationally as we move forward, there's going to be much less of an emphasis on actually touching, feeling, or even keeping something on your limited hard drive. And instead, I think we're morphing to a performance environment, a listening environment, where you gain access through your device to any song at any time, on demand, whenever you want it, or in a stream that somebody else has put together for you. But the idea of actually paying on a per transaction basis and getting a particular song for the money that you're paying is becoming a thing of the past as we move forward.
In that context, we recently heard from Amazon with their cloud storage of listening to music through their service. Got a little bit of criticism and pushback. Where would the RIAA come into that conversation with a technology company and really a distribution company like Amazon, who's pertinent to our environment here in the Chattanooga area? Where would the RIAA come into that conversation?
We come in with a lot of questions. It's so interesting because the idea of taking your own music and putting it into a locker or into a cloud so that you can access it remotely anywhere in the world, so you're not tied to a particular device or to a station, is intriguing and very, very useful. The question, I think, comes on where partnerships are going to be formed going forward and whether or not somebody can commercialize that kind of personal system, or whether when you commercialize it and make a business out of it, you have some obligation to do it in partnership with those who are actually creating the music that you're making money from. So legally, I don't have any answers for you because I don't know. But I do know we have a lot of questions. And I'm sure Amazon's received a call. And I know that others like Google have been talking about launching services, some that are licensed, some that are unlicensed like Amazon's. And that's part of this uncharted territory where we're going to have to bump up against each other and figure out our partnerships as we move forward.
As well, a question was brought up at the luncheon about Spotify, a company out of the UK, looking to enter the North American market. Been rumors of Spotify looking to buy the Warner Music Group. And is that a conversation? Is that the same sort of situation? You're in a lot of questions looking at that transaction. How is that going to work? How does Spotify come into the U.S. market?
Yeah, I think that Spotify in Europe has been successful in penetration, but not so successful in making money. And so I think the question for the U.S. marketplace that people will be asking is, how do we take this great new model, this new streaming model, which is the future for all of us, and make it sustainable? How do we figure out a way in which we can form partnerships so that the ubiquity of music that it offers can be done in a way that is valuable for the consumer, but that doesn't either cannibalize legitimate paid-for music, or that's licensed in a way that it provides a sustainable model for artists going forward so they can make a living. I'm confident that this year we will get there, and I think that the companies that I represent are going to be very flexible in licensing models with Spotify and with others. But whenever you're changing the way that you license, it takes a little bit of time.
And in that licensure and how you're dealing with other companies, other technologies coming in, you also spoke quite a bit about and gave great examples in your talk to the Technology Council about dealing with other governments around the world and how they're dealing with piracy issues, China being a forefront of that effort. And you look at a market like South Korea, very high broadband penetration. If you look at the K-pop sort of models where they're leapfrogging everything else, debuting their songs on YouTube instead of anywhere else. And so it opens up a can of worms. When you're dealing with other countries like that, is that an effort that is, you come in with the philosophy of your organization to them, or is it a modification of where their laws are at and trying to come to some agreement?
It's somewhere in between. We try to expect from other countries the same respect for intellectual property that we in the United States expect to intellectual property. And many times we show examples of how investing in your own creativity and your own research and development will actually yield much better internal results for the company than simply relying on a counterfeiting model, which is incredibly short-term and doesn't yield any cultural benefits. But with the understanding that in developing countries, you don't have the same infrastructure, you don't have the same licensing models. And so you have to be flexible if you want to enter a market. And I would say that it's somewhere in the middle. We push very hard for trade agreements that include high standards of respect for intellectual property. And we focus a lot on the enforcement in that country. You can have the greatest law in the world, but if the courts don't enforce it, or if you can't find a prosecutor, you're in trouble. And so we work on both sides of that.
Well, Mitch Glazier, Executive Vice President of Government and Industry Relations for the Recording Industry Association of America, thanks for coming in the studios. We appreciate it. Thanks for speaking at the Chattanooga Technology Council. Thank you very much. Zack, publisher of Pulse News Weekly, WPLZ.